Hello and hello. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Vigil for Democracy. My name is Miracle Jones. I am the legislative director here at One Hood Power, a Pittsburgh based organization that works to build political power through civic engagement. We are here today since January 6th to talk about what happened today a year ago when hundreds of people stormed the Capitol building in order to create an insurrection. How did this happen? What what do we do to make sure another insurrection does not occur? And how do we fight to have voter rights and a pro-voter agenda during these tumultuous times? Today, I'll be joined with organizations and organizers all throughout Pennsylvania who spent the past year doing just that, building coalitions, talking to voters, talking to people about the issues, and not giving into fear, hatred, or division. To talk about what's going on since January 6th, we'll be joined by Ross Tedder, an organizer who spent the last year working on various campaigns. Billy Reeves from Casa San Jose, who's been talking about issues that impact immigrants here in Pennsylvania. We'll also be talking with some of our partners, such as Patrick from the Keystone Education Fund, who actually has been building through Southwestern and rural Pennsylvania around issues impacting the environment and the future of Pennsylvania. So, to get started, we are going to show some videos to talk about what happened with January 6th. This first video comes from the Los Angeles Times, and they just released it yesterday. So, we can remind people about what actually occurred and to make sure we do not do this again. And we're going to cue up that video for you now.
Shit on us.
So, we want to remind people that today, as we reflect on January 6th, that we remember that this uprising started because people did not believe that this election was a free and fair election. And so we want to remind people that no matter who you are, that in our Commonwealth, that we have no business fighting against each other, but instead it is our duty and obligation to come together because no matter our color, background, or party, we all believe that people must have the right to vote, and as one person, one vote. January 6th was a violent and deadly attack against all of us. It was against our democracy and against our freedom and values as voters who have the right to decide who represents us and to accept, even when the people who win are not our primary choice, to support them as the actual winners. Mounting evidence shows that January 6th was a coordinated attack to undermine our elections. And since that day, hundreds of pieces of legislation have been introduced to do just that, to restrict the rights to vote, to restrict the times we can vote, to restrict the places that we're able to vote in. Most of these places, again, are in our rural and Black and Brown communities. So, what do we do? How do we galvanize to come together to fight, to support voter rights, and to protect our democracy? Well, that's what we're going to be talking with our panelists for the next hour and a half. So I'm so glad that you joined us. Today, instead of lamenting about what happened on January 6th, we hope that we can organize and galvanize people to come together to fight for voter rights, to push our elected officials to protect the right to vote, and to give you some tools, resources to talk to your neighbors, friends, and community members to get them excited and encouraged about protecting the right to vote. Our first guest is going to be Ross Tedder, an organizer from Pennsylvania who has spent the last year working on various campaigns from changing the way our criminal justice system works to starting more registration initiatives to get more people registered to vote, as well as to push politicians to respond and to engage with the electorate. So please welcome to our Vigil for Democracy for Pittsburgh, Ross.
Thank you so much, Miracle.
So for those of you who do not know, can you just talk a little bit about the work that you have done and what January 6th meant to you?
For sure, yeah. So, I started getting like involved in this work, in earnest, really just about 2 years ago. So, I was a student at Howard. Like a lot of universities, right? Stuff happens, right? They're not super big fans of activism. Not gonna get into all that, but I came home and really started working first on Summer's campaign, and that was sort of my foray into not just working on campaigns, but sort of building power, in our area. So I've worked on Summer's campaign. I worked last year on APA's ballot initiative to end solitary confinement, which was, may I say, like a huge, and strenuous effort. And I just want to shout out like anybody that was a part of that. I'm assuming there's a lot of folks on this live stream right now who definitely were. But really, I've sort of just tried to, center my work here around the needs of our community, and in terms, and when I say that, I mean, what sort of things are blocking particularly Black people in Pittsburgh, from prospering. Um, as far as what January 6th, meant to me, it was a very scary event. I remember last year sitting in APA's office, during, while this is all breaking out, live streaming this. And I remember like just being like, oh my God, like this cannot be actually happening. Like those people are all gonna get arrested, clearly. And then it just kept escalating and it kept escalating. And then, whenever I was watching MSNBC, and folks were in the chamber, that's when I'm just like, oh wow, this is real. And it was scary because obviously that was happening, in DC, but the thing that caused the insurrection, which is white supremacy, that exists everywhere. And as an organizer and as someone who was working on a project, that sort of stands in the face of that, I was very nervous. So I remember just texting everyone, like go home, work's done for the day. I wasn't around, during September 11th. I mean, I was like a year old, so don't really remember, but I imagine that it felt similar for those of you who were there. So it was really just a wake up call, honestly, that our work here is more than just about making sure that people are participating, in our electoral system and are getting the things that they need, but it's about protecting folks too, because clearly, folks are not just sitting idly by. Um, say what you will about the folks who actually participated on January 6th, but regardless of that, the folk who commanded that, are still out here, influencing, our electoral sphere. So it's about counteracting that. It's about organizing people to make sure that we have a response to that when it happens again.
Thank you for that. And as you said, you've only been organizing for a couple of years. A lot of people on January 6th, that was their wake up call to say, you know what, there is something going on in this country, and I feel obligated to now join and fight for voter rights, fight for democracy, to figure out what's going on in this country. Can you just talk about some entry points into organizing for people who may not be really politically active or politically conscious about what's going on?
No, 100%. Yeah. So, um, as Miracle just said, it's super important to be involved. Like I say, like the best entry points, are joining a local organization, right? In the Pittsburgh area, right, in particular, right, we are lucky to have so many great organizations that are doing this work, right? One Hud Power included. Of course, I'm biased. I work for Unite, so like I think everyone who's listening to this, should go join Unite right now. But if we're not your fancy, that's fine too. Like this Pittsburgh United, we have PA United. There's so many different organizations, and depending on what issue matters the most to you or what you see as being the most important thing, right? There's an organization for you. So whether that's environmental justice, whether that's the right to vote or what have you, right? Joining an organization is a really good way to take the energy that you have and plug it into something that's tangible. Aside from that, I think before we even get to joining organizations, right? I think it's just important for us all to stay alert, right? And when I say that, I don't just mean like watching the national news, but keeping abreast, of what's happening locally, right? And you don't even have to watch the news for that. All you have to do is talk to people who are actually being affected by that, right? That's the first step. We can't be effective at all if we're not, educated. Number two, I think it's really important that we all register to vote. That's an obvious thing that's pushed on us every year, obviously, especially as Black people. And I think there's like an argument to be made that like sometimes it's pushed more of like an expectation more than like something that people should do because it impacts them, but even if what's on a national level doesn't necessarily, you don't think that you can make an impact on that, right? Locally, right, that is the furthest thing from the truth. So it's really important to register to vote. Make sure that your community is registered to vote as well. Um, Number three, it's really important to become familiar with, what local offices do, right? It's really important to understand what a magistrate does, for example, right? That's someone who is like the first point, of entry in the criminal justice system, right? And that person is supposed to be someone from the community. Otherwise, you have someone whose allegiances might not be with the community, right? Deciding whether or not someone should go face first, into that system. So it's super important that we're aware of what offices do and how to run for those. And number five, like run for office, right? Um, Local races, right? You would be very surprised, just how little participation is in those, right? And that's bad for a lot of reasons, but it does mean that you have a fairly like accessible entry point, to that. So there's a lot of tools, for how to run grassroots campaigns, but at the end of the day, electoralism was meant to service, our communities. It's meant to service us, not people who are away from the community, not people who have no connection to that. So I think we all definitely need to consider what that looks like for us.
Thank you for that. And as we wrap up, can you just talk a little bit about how people can go about building, power? You talked about running for office. You talked about, registering to vote. Where do people find this information about registering to vote? Where are the requirements to run for office? Where are the
Mhm.
requirements for certain positions? Where is this listed at for people?
Absolutely. So the easiest way to register to vote, if you're in Pennsylvania, is just votespa.com, which I'm sure they'll put up on the screen at some point. But votespa.com is where you can find out how to register to vote, if you're eligible to register to vote, and to be honest with you, like most people are like able to be registered to vote. Even if you are a felon, right, that does not automatically disqualify you from voting. So votespa.com is sort of a good starting point. If you're outside of Pennsylvania, TurboVote's a great place just to get information about how to register and that sort of thing. As far as running for office, It depends, right? Typically, like your local state government will have a website on the State Department, a page explaining like the petitioning process, which starts in advance of the election, what the requirements are to be eligible to run, and so on and so forth, right? So that's information that's readily available. Other information which you would probably need to plan your run, whenever that happens, that's a bit more like hard to come by, right? It's public, but public access and practical access are not always the same. So if you're looking for numbers on previous election years, how many votes you think you'll need to win, or even just what parts of your neighborhood are on which precincts, all that information is going to be on your county elections website. But there are resources online, such I don't believe I can actually plug this as partisans. I'm not going to say that part. But there are resources online where you can find information on how to run.
Yes, and I think it's very important because a part of uh, the the motivation for some people to take on January 6th, they didn't understand some of the rules, right? You had people saying, oh, this person is voting, but they're a felon, or oh, this person is voting, but they live in this district. And understanding the rules and where to go to get information is one of the most important ways to fight disinformation and to fight this extremism, because we understand, like Ross was saying, a lot of times this information you have to dig for it. It's not readily available.
Mm-hmm.
For some of the numbers, you sometimes have to pay to get that information. And so we do understand that there is actual barriers to entry when it comes to electoral politics. It's not as open and as honest as we would like to see, because again, you have to go to these websites. Sometimes you have to pay for these lists. Sometimes you have to spend your free time sitting in meetings. And we understand that for people who are working, raising families, going to school, it's not always the easiest. And so we also wanted to make sure we're providing people information to do their own research after this program is there. So that is why we wanted to make sure we talked about that. But as we let you go, Ross, do you have any parting comments for people as we reflect on January 6th?
Yeah, I'm gonna be respectful, as well, because I know today was not necessarily a day to like, sulk or wallow. I will say that this fight is not over by any means. What happened last January. To be quite honest with you, I see it as a practice run. It's the culmination of a political movement that's been taking place in this country really since the days of Nixon and Reagan. And we're sort of coming to the culmination of that. So right now, and I say this especially like as a Black person and a Black organizer, we're responsible for our own fate right now. And there's a lot of weeds that we can get into regarding like politicians and policies. Today's not the time to do that. But today is the day to recognize that we all have to be alert, that we all have to be active, to sort of fight this mass political movement that culminated in January 6th and is absolutely still working to have another one that might be successful next time. So let's all get to work.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Ross. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And lastly, where can people get in contact with you? Where can people volunteer? You mentioned some organizations. How can they reach out to you for that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I would give out my work email. So my work email is just ross at unite for pa.com. That's my work email address. You can contact me there. Um, Other organizations that I mentioned on this show, the best place to go in lieu of like a physical email address would probably be their website. So I mentioned One Hood Power, obviously, that should be pretty self-explanatory. Um, our website is just uniteforpa.com. There's PittsburghUnited.com as well, and PA United. So websites are a great place to start. They have more information, and even if you just want to like send an email to their info app, that works too.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
All right, our next guest is Billy from Casa San Jose. Casa San Jose is a local Pittsburgh organization that advocates for the immigrant population. So, welcome Ross to the program. Welcome Billy to our program.
No worries. Great to be here. Thank you, Miracle.
Thank you so much for joining us. Can you just again, I know it's a little bit of a heavy day, but can you just talk about what January 6th meant to you and the organizing work that you've been doing over the past year?
Yeah. So, first to me, regarding January 6th, I was actually watching the proceedings in Congress, regarding the debates between different legislators, regarding the election, the certification of all the election results. I remember watching Paul Gosar. This is a Republican legislator from Arizona. He was giving his argument regarding election fraud and mail-in ballots. And I remember, directly the chamber going to disarray because the Capitol building had been breached. And, basically, as I saw people trickling in and I was changing news channels because I was originally watching C SPAN, I was really concerned because I saw how many people were breaching the Capitol and I immediately knew it was an insurrection. This was not something peaceful. This was not something, just wanted to get a message across. They wanted to make a statement. They wanted to show that these supporters were here. They wanted to basically overturn our election results, and it really demonstrated to me the fragility of our democracy. In addition, now to what we've been doing with Casa San Jose, basically with voter education, we want to ensure that our community members are able to vote. Especially up in Lawrence County, we've been doing a lot of work up there with the Puerto Rican community. After Hurricane Maria, we had a large swath of Puerto Ricans immigrate to that area, and a lot of them have registered to vote. However, due to language barriers, it kind of prevents them from knowing when an election is, where to vote, where their polling places are. So over this past year, especially for the general election, we did a lot of outreach up in central western Pennsylvania and southwestern Pennsylvania regarding voter access and access to your polling locations, and if you need a ride to the polls, how we can facilitate that as well.
Thank you so much for bringing that up because it's very important, again, for people to understand that some of the response to January 6th has introduced legislation that would actually reduce some of the reduce some of the poll sites, to change some of the access points. And again, here in Pennsylvania, we do not have early voting. Um, Similarly, that some other states or commonwealths may have. And so the access to voting is something that's very important. But also, you were talking about, working with people from the Puerto Rican community. A lot of people did not even know that Puerto Ricans were already American citizens, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of the again, some of the motivation for January 6th is this idea that people are voting who should not be voting, or people are voting illegally. Can you talk about how that impacts like the work that you're doing and how that is actually targeting and hurting some of the immigrant populations?
So, in direct, response to the Puerto Rican community, a lot of that causes a lot of resistance, especially when the community is not educated that Puerto Ricans are actually U.S. citizens. They are allowed to vote. Those are the rules of the law, and that is the case. There's specific provisions in the Voter Rights Act that ensures that Puerto Rican voters, well, more specifically, voters that aren't educated in a public school system that's not primarily English. For example, in Puerto Rico, it's Spanish. So basically ensures that they're able to receive ballots in Spanish and their language that they were educated in, so they're able to understand the ballots and ensure that they're able to vote. In addition, directs polling places to have signage in those respective locations to ensure that voters can understand where to vote and how to fill out everything. So, in that sense, it's very important to ensure that our community has language access.
So since January 6th, what has been some of the work that you've been doing to build political power, and how are people able to get involved in the work and organizing that you're doing?
So since January 6th, a lot of the political power that we've been building a lot of political power in the community, is our encouraging our community members. Well, not encouraging, we really want our community members to get involved with our campaigns, especially the driver's license campaign, our tuition equity campaign, in addition, our healthcare campaign, many others that, we want to provide more accessibility to the community that we serve. And in general, this is for allies as well. We want to emphasize to the general community here in Pittsburgh and Southwestern Pennsylvania, become allies. Volunteer with Casa San Jose. Like with Russ is a little biased for me because I'm with Casa San Jose. Volunteer with us. Become an ally to, a disenfranchised community within the region. Stand up for their rights. Understand that you can call your legislator at any time. That's one piece of homework I hope everyone can do after this. Look up who your local legislator is, your state legislator. I'm sure not everyone knows that. So, you have to understand that you're beholden to, or your legislators are beholden to you, the constituents. So don't have any, or be discouraged or have any fear in, reaching out to your legislators. Call them, call their office, send an email regarding issues that, you're passionate about, and get involved to ensure that they're standing up for the right things. For example, with voter ID, we saw twice this year it's been introduced, and luckily the governor, or multiple times been introduced, and luckily the governor has blocked it. However, we want to ensure legislators on both sides, that this isn't the right type of legislation, and this is only going to hinder disenfranchised communities from being able to carry out their constitutional duty and vote. So in addition, other ways kind of build power, get involved in marches. Marches, it's a great way to kind of have an entrance into the political sphere. You'll meet a lot of like-minded people in events such as those. And in addition, it's a great way to build connections as well.
Thank you for that. I think this is very important because a lot of times people feel like overwhelmed and they don't know where to go, don't know where to start. And so that's how people sometimes get tuned into things that radicalize them in the wrong ways. And as we're looking at this legislation that's coming down, and you're talking about things that directly impact your the people that you're servicing, when you're going through and you're talking to people and you're registering voters and you're engaging in language access, what do you want politicians to know about your community and why it's so important that these minimum qualifications are met?
So what we want legislators to understand is that, they have the same rights as everyone else. This isn't a different playing field where, Puerto Rican voters are at a lower level than everyone else. We have to ensure that everyone's vote is equal. One vote is one vote, and that every vote has the same weight. And, we want to ensure legislators that they understand that. They understand that they have to stand up for all voters within their districts, and they have to understand that, especially, constituents that speak a different language, they're still their constituents. It doesn't mean your constituents are only people that speak English. You have constituents from all different cultures, backgrounds, religions, and creeds that move into your district, and, you are beholden to represent them. So basically, I want legislators to understand that, not everyone in their district looks like them. And basically, you have to be willing to undertake the task of representing everyone that's within your district, regardless of their race, color, gender, their culture, political orientation. You have to represent the people that are within your district.
And talking about representation, you put together a really amazing uh, form that talked about for the mayoral election. Can you just talk about what that work entailed, how you were able to do that, pull together for people who are watching who may feel there's a barrier to reaching out to different organizations? Can you just walk into that process?
Yeah. So, for me, the main reason I want to host the mayoral debate was for our community to understand what's going on the local level of politics. I want our community to understand the importance of the mayoral race, and to understand that, this is these are what the candidates have to represent. This is how they're going to stand up for you. Now, going into the side of what that entailed, it took a lot of networking. It took a lot of outreach. I definitely, I'm new to being an organizer. I've only been in this for a year, so it definitely was a very big learning experience. We had 30 co-sponsors. This ranged from neighborhood associations, community development corporations, other nonprofits, basically organizations all around Pittsburgh. And it was a great experience. It definitely took a lot of connections, and people were willing to connect me with other people. It took a lot of networking. However, it was very successful, and we were able to have a large turnout as well, since it was, especially during COVID, it was nice to have a hybrid event where Mr. Moreno and now Mayor Gainey were able to sit down and have a conversation with the community regarding what they stood for and how they were going to progress Pittsburgh.
And you said it took a lot of networking. Can you just talk about how many organizations were able to sign on and how you found these organizations?
So there was 30 co-sponsors. So basically, some of the organizations that were kind of our first co-sponsors were co-sponsors that were involved in the April primary forum. This was virtual with Pittsburgh United. So, when I introduced the idea of the mayoral debate, we immediately had some co-sponsors immediately sign on from that event. In addition, I looked up online. I looked up the city website regarding, registered nonprofits, kind of, or community neighborhood associations. That was one way. Registered neighborhood associations within Pittsburgh. And I actually found one from Ravenstall's, former Mayor Luke Ravenstall's administration, and Padua's administration. So basically, a lot of research in that sense. I was able to reach out to each neighborhood association one by one, and I was able to get a lot of networking, connecting, able to have them sign on. It was a nice experience. It really was.
Perfect. And so I think it's very important, again, when we're talking about how we organize for voter rights, understand that a lot of times you're literally just cold calling, cold emailing people saying, hey, I have this idea. Can you support me? And that's how you build coalitions. And that's how you make sure that another January 6th doesn't happen. Because if we all know each other and we all know the work that's doing, it's hard to say that a person is stealing an election or a person is showing up to vote when they're not supposed to, if we know the work that's going to turn out the votes. And so as we wrap up with you, can you just talk about how people can get involved, how people can contact you, and any projects that you have coming up? I know people said they were interested in the driver's license work that you're doing.
Yeah. So first off, if you have any interest in getting involved with us, you can reach me at billy@casasanjose.org. Our website is casasanjose.org. In addition, we would love more allies and community members to get involved with the driver's license campaign. This would allow for undocumented residents within the Commonwealth to have access to driver's licenses. In addition, our tuition equity campaign, which would allow for undocumented students to have access to in-state tuition and in-state financial aid offered through PASHE. There's many other campaigns as well. So basically, I would love for allies to reach out to me or anyone that's interested, and I would love to fill them in. And in addition, I just wanted to end it with what Vice President Harris said this morning. If we're not vigilant, if we don't defend it, democracy will simply not stand. So it's important that we get involved. We empower others to get involved as well. We empower each other, and that's how we're going to ensure that democracy can carry on for much longer. We want.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Miracle.
And when we talk about mobilizing and organizing, we always want to make sure that people who are on the ground doing the work are also at the table talking to politicians, building power. And one organizer who's going to join us next, Dina Stanley, who runs Trans Uniting, has been doing that for the past couple of years and actually pushing politicians to pay more attention to some of the needs of the community that she serves. And so welcome Dina Stanley to the program.
Hello, Miracle.
Hi, Dina. How are you doing?
I'm well today. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. We're here talking about like reflecting on January 6th and talking about the fight to protect voter rights. Can you just talk about you were what was going through your mind a year ago when you were watching the events happen at the Capitol?
Um, this is exactly, what we are fighting against. These white folks feeling like they have the power to do whatever they want in the country, that they are the superior, that they are America and we aren't, and it really showed, there was really no security there. There was no plan put in place at all whatsoever. So I just watched it and said, this is exactly what we're fighting against. We have to continue to fight against this, the ignorance and just the level of hatred, you know. But for the most part, it was just these. This is the people, These this is how they react to bullcrap.
And so, can you just talk about some of the work you've done since January 6th to educate people about the right to vote, the reasons why they need to be out here voting?
Absolutely. Even before that, during before that and during that, first thing we did, we were in the streets. We were, putting actions together, within our community, especially within the transgender community. We really don't have no rights outside of Allegheny County, and inside of Allegheny County, there's only, an ordinance put into place. So just bringing people together and making sure that folks knew that, and just trying to educate them around policies, around political, just political avenues and people, so they know how to get out here and who to call and how to vote, and how to get engaged in a political world. We also did a whole series. Well, I did a whole series. Listen to Black women, vote, be counted, and more. Just the same thing, just educating our people. A lot of times, people, within our community, not only are working and just kind of busy with family and don't get out and vote a lot of times, but really don't understand it, and don't see the purpose of it, because they're just looking around and their life is just like, oh, blah, and not understanding like this is how we change that. So just making sure that folks are educated, especially within our community, about that, and the importance of getting out here and letting your voice be heard by your vote. So just pushing that, no matter what avenue we went through, may it be, on social media or may it be out in the streets.
Thank you for that. And can you, I know our last guest, Billy, was talking about one of the barriers to the communities that he works in is there's a language access barrier. Can you talk about some of the barriers to voting that impact the people that you serve?
Sure. So for us, it's all around the board. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about housing. We're talking about job. All of this, all of these different avenues, are affecting us. And some of those issues, especially with the um, excuse me, when we're talking about, just the court system in general, a lot of trans women, get arrested for survival sex work. When we're talking about survival sex work, if you get a prostitution charge on your record, you can't get a really a good stable job in the state of Pennsylvania, because it's worse than having a felony on your record. These are problems and issues that can be solved, with voting. Getting these people, these district judges, out of the office, and things of that nature. Making sure that they know that we are your constituents and we do have voices. So again, it just goes back to, um, letting people know, that your voice and your vote, it really matters.
And you talk a lot about like the criminal justice system. You've been very like open and honest about having to fight those systems, but you've also been out here registering people to vote, doing these series. So, what do you like about registering people to vote, getting people involved in civic engagement, and what are some of the things that you have seen make a difference in the past year?
Okay, so for me, it's just when I'm seeing my people out here and letting their voice be heard by those votes, it empowers me to continue to move forward, because one day we're going to get to that place, where we do have rights, that we can go into a job and get a good paying job and don't have to do survival sex work. So that continues to give me the power to move forward, when we're getting these people signed up, when we're educating them, and when we're just out there, educating our people. That's what it's really about, and letting them know that this is the way to go right here. This is how we make these changes, because these folks are the folks who are, you know making all the decisions for us while we're sitting here. And not only are we in the streets, but we are, in these boardrooms and things. But these folks right here are the people who are making the decisions for all of us.
Thank you so much for that. I think this is very important because a lot of times we look at politicians as disconnected from the community, and we forget that the politicians, are our community members, and they are supposed to be representing and fighting for our values. And so, can you just talk a little bit about Trans Uniting, how people can get involved with volunteering for your organization, where people can go to learn and support and to donate, and some projects you have coming up?
Sure. So, right now we do have a housing project that we put in place. It's called Haven House, and we're helping the trans folks within the city. It's small, but it's mighty. That's what I say. So, if you want to get involved with that, we do have a lot of projects coming up, like Pride. 2022 Pride. We are doing just a ton of things throughout the city. You can look onto the website, transunitingpgh.org. If you would like to volunteer or anything of that nature, you can hit me up at dstanley@transunitingpgh.org. And you can also go to the website, transunitingpgh.org, to donate. Or if you have any, ideas or anything, you can definitely get in touch with us through that way.
Perfect, perfect. And I know that you have been just very influential in supporting the um, local family of Amari Lake. Can you just talk a little bit about that, and if there's anything else that you would like the community to do specifically in that regards?
Yes, I'm Ari Lee. So just stand up. One, you can donate to the GoFundMe. You can find that on our page, and you can find that on all over social media. It's like really been blessed on social media. So um, the family really do need the help of the community to help pay for the funeral costs. And also, when you see something, say something. On top of that, we will be doing an action soon, so look out for that, because our lives do matter. In the last 2 years, we've lost about a dozen trans women in our backyard, in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. It should not be happening at all whatsoever. That is absolutely unacceptable, and it needs to be brought to the forefront. We need these cases solved. None of them have been solved. None of them at all whatsoever. None of them after the first maybe month are talked about, unless we're talking about them. It should not be happening. Our lives do matter. And that's a problem here, and across the country, that our lives don't matter to a lot of folks. We sit in different silos and not understand that all of these depths intersect, but we're at the bottom of the barrel. We are triple marginalized folks who already have it hard. And when I mean hard, we can't even get a job. And when we do things to take care of ourselves, we get thrown into the criminal system. And then they make it even harder for us to be able to survive. And then we do things that, to survive, and then we're murdered. That's not what happened with Amari Lee, but that happens to a lot of the girls. They're put in situations where it is so dangerous that they lose their lives. So we should have rights just like everyone else. We should be respected like everyone else.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us, Dina from Trans Uniting. And
thanks.
You're welcome. I think it's very important to bring people on, because if you looked at, or if you were there a year ago watching, live, a lot of the comments that were being made, there were a lot of homophobic and transphobic comments for some of the people who were storming the Capitol, and we wanted to bring people who are directly impacted and who represented communities that are directly being targeted on January 6th to talk about the issues that impact their communities and the reasons why people are galvanizing and coming together to fight for voter rights, because there's so many issues and things for people to actually be fighting for. And so that's why we're having these conversations. And Pennsylvania was really at the heart of a lot of things that were going on January 6th. People did not understand our legislation, particularly our Act 77 legislation. And to talk a little bit about that, we're going to play this speech, just a little bit of a roughly a 5-minute clip from Congressman Mike Doyle, who represents Pennsylvania. And we're going to play this speech for you. We're going to turn on our closed captioning for our people, and to remind people to watch. And we're going to go on and we're going to go ahead and play this video for you.
What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nearly 7 million Pennsylvanians showed up to vote in the 2020 elections. They cast their votes for Democrats and Republicans up and down the ballot, including the entire U.S. House delegation, the entire state House, and half of the state Senate and other state and local races. Since the election, there have been allegations of widespread election fraud in Pennsylvania. But remarkably, the 20 suits filed by the Trump campaign, Pennsylvania Republicans, and others challenging the results in Pennsylvania have never claimed that there was voter fraud. Perhaps that's because attorneys can lose their license when they make unsubstantiated claims in court. That's where the rubber really meets the road. So, if these lawsuits didn't claim election fraud, what did they claim? Most of the legal challenges to the presidential election in Pennsylvania question relatively small numbers of ballots that were allegedly tainted by technical violations. Even assuming that all these ballots had been cast for Joe Biden, throwing them out wouldn't have changed the result of the election. Now, one exception is the lawsuit filed by one of our colleagues from Pennsylvania, Kelly versus Commonwealth, which would have thrown out all the mail-in votes cast in the 2020 general election on the grounds that Act 77, the state law allowing those votes, was unconstitutional. That suit would have disenfranchised 2.5 million Pennsylvanians. Let's let that sink in. 2.5 million Pennsylvanians would have had their votes nullified. Now, I want to provide my colleagues with some background about the state law at the heart of this challenge. In 2019, the Republican-controlled state legislature approved Act 77, a bipartisan bill to reform the state's election laws, which instituted no-excuse mail balloting. Act 77 was supported almost unanimously by Republicans in the state House and state Senate. In fact, it was unanimous in the state Senate and all but 2 Republicans in the state House. Moreover, once this act was passed, Act 77 had a 120-day period where challenges could be filed against the act if people thought it was unconstitutional. Well, 4 months went by, nobody files a challenge. In June 3rd, Pennsylvania had their primary under this new system. Nobody challenged the primary election. It was only challenged in November when Republicans didn't get the result they wanted at the top of the ticket. Not surprisingly, this case was dismissed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court was denied. Another exception is Texas versus Pennsylvania. They asked the court to reject the results of the Pennsylvania contest, the presidential contest in Pennsylvania and several other states, disenfranchising tens of millions of voters. 7 Republican members of the Pennsylvania U.S. House delegation signed the U.S. House Republican brief in support of Texas versus Pennsylvania. Well, I feel compelled to point out to my colleagues that the same voters who sent them to the 117th Congress cast their votes for the president by marking the very same ballots, which were read by the very same ballot scanners and monitored by the very same election workers. Yet our colleagues who signed the brief only want to invalidate the presidential votes. This is illogical and inconsistent, colleagues, and I'm pleased to note that the Supreme Court rejected it as well. The fact is, the election has received unprecedented scrutiny in the courts. I believe it's irresponsible and undemocratic to argue today that the U.S. Congress ought to relitigate the 2020 presidential election and second-guess the will of the voters in multiple states, the decisions of numerous state and federal courts, including the Supreme Court, and the counts and recounts conducted by state election officials. There were 20 lawsuits filed in Pennsylvania challenging aspects of the Pennsylvania presidential election. In 19 of them, you got laughed out of court. The one case you won affected roughly 100 votes. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won by over 80,000.
Gentleman's time has expired.
And the reason, again, like we said, we wanted to play that speech is because even here in Pennsylvania, the fight about the election still continues. There are people who are pushing another review, another audit of the election because they did not understand what the rules are, and they're pushing this division that some people are voting when they should not be. And so, again, one of the reasons why we're having this conversation is to encourage people to research, to do their own information, look at the tools and resources available to them, and to talk with their community members, their neighbors, because the only way we're able to prevent January 6th is if we stop the disinformation and misinformation out there, and we de-radicalize folks and get them to understand that we all have a right to have a place and a seat at the table, and we all have a right to have our votes counted. And so our next guest, it comes from the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign, who has spent years calling for a moral revival for the country to fight for poor people, working class people, and we want to welcome to our Vigil for Democracy, Brian Moore from Pennsylvania's Poor People Campaign.
Awesome. Thanks for welcoming me into the Space Miracle.
And thank you so much for joining us. Can you just talk a little bit about the work that you do and how January 6th impacted that?
Absolutely. So for folks who are unfamiliar, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, is the revival and continuation of a campaign that was started by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, a campaign which was founded with the intention of bringing together the poor and dispossessed across all lines of division to fundamentally restructure this society. And unfortunately, Dr. King was assassinated as the seeds of this campaign were beginning, and so it led to a swift demise in '68. But what we're doing now is carrying out the demands of this campaign. And of course, the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign and the national campaign are fighting to address the interlocking evils of poverty, racism, militarism, and the war economy, ecological devastation, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism that places the problems of poverty on the individual poor people and not the systems and structures that we have in place in the society. And so I think, trying to remember January 6th of last year, it's a tough question because just recognizing that in January 6th of 2021, the 140 million poor people in this nation were moving through a multitude of crises in that moment. And so we're navigating the global pandemic, which is both an economic, a public health crisis, really, exposing the limitations and deficits of this system that doesn't guarantee healthcare to everybody in the midst of a pandemic. A system that allows people to be unemployed and have our right to housing compromised in the middle of a pandemic. And so just moving through these crises, leading up to January 6th. And I know just personally, I was moving through a period where my own family members were suffering from COVID, and 2 of them wound up passing away the week following this insurrection. And so just to witness this on screen, I think it was both frightening to see, personally, I think politically, but then also not surprising. I think it's important to recognize that what happened on January 6th didn't just emerge spontaneously. The seeds of that were just sown for decades, and then also it's just something that has just historically happened and has always witnessed these reactions whenever you're seeing the power of people being utilized in ways that can create great change. And so that is what happened in January 6th. And I think that's what I'm taking away is just a historical reaction manifesting that day. But I think something also really important, which underscores the work of the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign is, we are in not an organization, but an organism committed to building across race and geography and all lines of division. And I think witnessing the mob violence in the Capitol, I won't say it dealt a setback to our movement, but it can help, it can work to, reinforce those divides that we are actively, working to bridge and build across. And so just still taking with us, hoping that communities that we organize within are trying to empower and embolden. I had my door shut. I did. I don't know how he broke in. But just hoping that, folks aren't then playing into the division that we are witnessing, and imagining that because looking at the representation of folks who are leading the mob violence, that then in our communities we cannot trust one another, that we don't have the same vested interests as one another. I'm not saying that my interests are aligned with the people who stormed the Capitol, because I think that is not the truth, but at the same time I think that we tend to take what we're witnessing and put that onto whole communities of people, and how can we have an intervention to combat that. Those really important coming out of the insurrection.
Yeah, I think that's very important because we're talking about the issues that impact us, right? We know we're all impacted by these systems. Bell Hooks, rest in peace, was talking about. We're all living under these systems of supremacy, and no one is benefiting and no one is flourishing. And so there's a lot of work that we can do to come together and have these universal coalitions. And you're talking about carrying on the legacy of Dr. King with your work. Can you just talk about some of the issues that you're organizing around and how people can get involved in those issues?
Absolutely. So I think just with this being the Vigil for Democracy, I do want to center some of the work that the campaign has been doing around like voter registration, and specifically anchoring this in two reports that we released. I believe one in 2020 prior to the general election, and then a more recent report this October or last October. We're in 2022 now. And so in 2020, we released a report. It was called "Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low Income Americans," and we used data to really demonstrate like the potential voting power of poor and low income folks. And then in October of 2021, we released our latest report, "Waking the Sleeping Giant: Poor and Low Income Voters in the 2020 Elections." And so in both of these pieces of work, we really work to counter the narrative that poor and low income folks are apathetic about politics, or that we don't care enough to vote, and recognizing that that is actually a myth. And what is true is that poor and low income folks don't show up in election cycles because we don't hear our needs and demands actually being addressed. Like, we're not represented in the platforms and the missions and vision of our candidates, and they don't feel like our votes matter. And also, it's just true that poor and low income folks are less likely to vote because of illness or disability or transportation issues, and especially given the rise of voter suppression laws. And so these are systemic barriers that are in place that limit our participation and engagement in electoral systems, not individualized failures. And so it's really important to recognize that. And I think that the reports that we release really help to demonstrate that work. Also, just knowing that moving through 2020, like what we were really effective in doing is, trying to connect with folks on the basis of platform. And so I mentioned at the top of my segment that, we are organizing around defeating the interlocking evils of poverty, racism, militarism in the war economy, ecological devastation, and our distorted moral narrative. And I think just being able to connect to people on the level of how they are impacted by these systemic injustices and these systemic failures, that is the way that we're able to bring folks like into this movement and bring folks into being registered to vote. And so we were registering folks through 2020 and organized a nonpartisan voter outreach and engagement drive where we contacted nearly 2 million poor and low-income voters, mostly in battleground states, including Pennsylvania and in the South. And of those contacted, we had more than 400,000 people who voted early in the election. And so just recognizing that there is a statistically significant impact of the work that we did and trying to engage low propensity voters, and like engaging voters, not necessarily around, just like what the parties want to present, but what is actually impacting our day-to-day lives is just so important and real. And so I think, that's a little bit about the work. If you could remind me of the question, maybe I could go deeper.
No, that was perfect, because I was asking some of the issues that you're working on, and I think it's very important, because again, how do we reach people? How are we talking to people when we're thinking about fighting for our democracy, but also preventing these uprisings? And how do we learn from history? And you seem to be doing a lot of that, like, great work as going making sure you're talking to all folks, and you're not limiting yourself to like certain populations, and you're bringing the Rainbow Coalition back. And if you think about like some of the work that our ancestors have done, I think it's very important how we build like solidarity, how we have those tough conversations, and we look at things that are happening in our lives to talk to issues and not create divisions. I think it's very important. And so how can people get involved in the work that you're doing? How can people sign up for the Poor People's Campaign? And what are some of the things that you have coming up?
Excellent. So I think the best way to get connected to the Poor People's Campaign, one, is going to poorpeoplescampaign.org. That is the site for the national campaign. And through the website, there's an opportunity to sign on to the Pennsylvania campaign listserv, and then our state campaign can connect with you. You can also follow the work of the Pennsylvania campaign at PA Poor People's Campaign on Facebook. I think, that's definitely our most active social media. And then I think it's important, though, to recognize that the campaign in itself is not an organization. is an organism. And so we're made up of lots of different organizations that are organizing on the fronts of struggle that are like part of the work of the Poor People's Campaign. And so, I sit on the coordinating committee for the Pennsylvania PPC, but I'm also a member and coordinator in Put People First Pennsylvania, a statewide organization that's fighting for healthcare as a human right. Local organizations that are also part of the campaign would include Pittsburghers for Public Transit, the Thomas Merton Center, and Better Path Coalition, Just Harvest. And so those are also organizations that folks can connect to get involved in our work. And I think most important as we consider this new year, the Poor People's Campaign has been grounded in our mandate that we must do more. We must do more mobilizing, organizing, registering folks to vote, and more educating and empowering poor and low-income people, clergy, activists, and advocates from all walks of life. And what we are doing is taking this energy and building towards a mass poor peoples and low-wage workers assembly and a moral march on Washington this June 18th, 2022. And just want to be clear that this is not just like a one-off day of action where we come together and then we disperse, because this is going to be a declaration of our ongoing and committed moral movement to shift the narrative and continue to build power among the 140 million poor and low wealth folks in this country, and to actually realize policies that we know that can put an end to poverty, racism, militarism in the war economy, ecological devastation, and this distorted moral narrative. And I want to just close actually with just sharing a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I think is really important and really grounds us in the purpose, mission, and vision of the Poor People's Campaign. In the final years of his life, he had shared, "Power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous to say no." And I think that it's so important for us to be able to build that collective power that we're able to wield against all political parties, and make sure that they are centering the needs of 140 million of us, and to really, make those shifts and that radical shifts in this just like this structure and the system that we're living within. And so it's going to take all of us coming together into a powerful moral fusion movement. And I'm just looking forward to continue to build this movement with everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I don't know if there's a better way to end that segment, because it's a great quote. And I thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I look forward to building with you in the future.
Awesome. Thank
And
you.
I do also want to say thank you for talking about the reflection, and even though it was deeply personal, and again, my condolences to you, because I know grief is ongoing. But so thank you so much for even being very transparent and vulnerable with us today.
Of course.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, like I said, today is a day for all of us. A lot of us are still, reflecting about what happened January 6th. Why did it happen? What was the catalyst where we could have maybe intervened and changed things? But we're also looking forward to the future about what can we do to mobilize, to organize, to build community, and to tear down this division that seems to separate us, and how do we build our political power. And so we want to talk with our next presenter, Pat Clark. A lot of you may have worked with him, know him. He's done a lot of great work politically, but also, in the arts and musically. And so we want to welcome Pat Clark from Keystone Progress to talk to us a little bit about some great future work. So welcome to the program, Pat.
Thank you so much, Miracle. I'm blessed and honored to be here with such an amazing array of supporters of democracy and organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. And just to, can you just talk a little bit about what was going through your mind a year ago when you looked on the news and you saw what was happening in DC?
Yeah, it's a story that's personal to me. It involves my family. My brother is a former U.S. Marine, and he lives in Washington, D.C. and works downtown in D.C. And he purposefully went into town to see what might be happening. And he sent a text message to everybody in the family saying that he'd been talking to the folks down there. He said his overwhelming impression was that there were $80,000 pickup trucks being parked that had never seen a speck of dirt or work. And he'd encountered a lot of people who were pretend soldiers and patriots, and they'd never served their country in any regard. And that same morning, my family heard from my niece that her son, Brendan Mullane, a member of the U.S. Armed Forces, had been honored 1 year ago this morning with special certification by the Army for saving a fellow soldier's life in an accident that occurred in a training session. And I couldn't have been more proud, and it couldn't have been a more disturbing juxtaposition to have somebody in my family who had served, and to see the terrible things that were being done, not just to the building and the threats to the people there, but to our democracy. And the thing that personally struck me as well was when I saw what was happening on the floor of the U.S. House. I've been honored to be invited to visit the floor of the U.S. House once, and I couldn't imagine it. I actually took a personal affront to the dishonor that they were bringing to the institution and to the place. It was something I'd never experienced before.
And looking at that, since January 6th, how have you been able to use those experiences to build coalitions to fight for the democracy that you love so much?
Well, I got pissed off, and I know a lot of people that day were too, but here's the difference. In 2016, I wasn't very happy after Election Day, but I didn't file a lawsuit. What I did was set a clear plan and a clear number. The 3 states that determined that election in 2016 determined that election by a total of 77,744 votes. So I set about saying that Keystone Progress and our education fund, we're going to make sure that over the next 4 years leading up to 2020, that we brought people into the electoral system that at least match that number in Pennsylvania. And we set about that goal. I also went back in 2017 after that election to my hometown. I grew up in a little town that I love dearly, right in the heart of red southern Michigan, because I didn't know if I could even have conversations with the people whom I'd grown up with and whom I'd known and trusted for years. And I went back to our public library. I worked with the library, and we put an event together that had 2 lefties, myself and my former civics teacher, who taught civics when I was a young man, by showing us the Watergate hearings live. And they brought in a former mayor, and they brought in a former elected official who were both conservatives. And I set about working with them over a period of weeks to interview them before we invited a library full of people to come in. And I focused on the things that they didn't see as partisan, that they saw as commonalities, issues that maybe others aren't talking to or weren't talking to at the time. And we had a very successful event. Actually, we had a library full of people, all white rural folks. There was a bit of change in my hometown from growing up. We had some Hispanic Americans as well. But it was a red town, and I was very deeply worried, but it worked. And I want to bring that same spirit to organizing out in places in Pennsylvania where no progressive knocks on doors. And I want to make sure that we're focusing not just on voters, but non-voters, infrequent voters, poor people, labor union members and former members, and the rural progressives that really don't have any contact with other folks who are of like minds. And I really want to look for those issues that unite and that no one has claimed. I always use I don't like robot cars. I hate seeing those things drive all over the street here. I don't trust them. And I don't like the fact that corporations are able to do testing in the public at no fee. But that doesn't make me a progressive. It doesn't make me a conservative. There are things in our world that need to unite us and can unite us. And that's what we're focusing on.
You talk about bringing people together in the role of progressives. Why do you think it's so important that when we're looking at democracy, we are focusing on these issues that we agree on as opposed to the issues that divide us?
Well, because the issues that we are pitched that divide us are often things. When you think about the amendments of the Constitution that people are most familiar with, pleading the Fifth Amendment, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, those all have large corporate and moneyed powers behind them that push those out. But we as a nation know far too little about our Constitution. And someone can say to me, abortion's not a constitutional right. You tell me where you find it in the Constitution. Well, the basis for abortion and the rulings in both Roe v. Wade and Casey was a foundation on privacy. The right to privacy is the central foundation to those issues. And I think that a lot of people who say, you know what, I'm against abortion, I could care one way or another. If you said to them, especially the people who don't have to have abortions because they're men, if you said to them, do you know if Roe v. Wade gets thrown out, they could also take away any right to privacy you have. Maybe that's next. And do you value your privacy? And I'd say that voters anywhere have a sense that if somebody can come and if somebody can fly a drone over top of my property at any time they want, if they can come into my bedroom and they can see the connection to issues that they're not informed around, I think you'll have a much better ability to cross those divides that have, in many cases, been artificially created by moneyed and powered people.
And you talked a lot about knocking on doors for people who are traditionally ignored. And we know a few years ago, the buzzword was like the flyover states, right? But we're looking at this idea that people are clinging to their silos for safety. How do we get people out? You talked about having this library, but what are some of the resources out there to get people out talking to each other to remove that fear that often leads to hatred?
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, I joke about this as saying like we're going into places where progressives run screaming away in fear, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I'm very progressive. I live in the big city, but I grew up in a little tiny town, and I think the way it works is through trust and knowledge, and it's also the recognition of the power of a vote, a single vote, and how important it is that a single vote of a congressperson or a group of congresspeople has no right to abrogate the votes of 7 million Pennsylvanians or 2.5 million mail-in voters. It just can't happen. The power of the vote is so significant. Kahari Mosley, I remember the first time he ran for a position on the ballot, and he was elected a committee person or ward chair, I can't remember which, by one vote. The guy running for Senate, John Fetterman, won his first election by one provisional ballot. Our election in 2000 was decided by 537 votes. And I can't tell you how effective it was organizing around local issues in 2001 by saying, this is the number that determined the presidential election. And you here in this college dormitory, you here in your community have the ability to vote in 3 times that number, and you should. And when people see that, when they see the power, somebody asked me last night watching the hockey game, I was getting into my spiel about the most powerful thing that we can do under the Constitution is vote. If one day, one election, 95% of the eligible voters actually voted, it would be revolutionary. It's a hugely powerful tool. And Guy said to me, you tell me one thing that has changed with a vote. And I said, well, a couple of days ago, a black man became mayor of the city of Pittsburgh. And to me, that was incredible and a great change in our city and I think our state. And he got that. And that's a demonstration of power. And I think if you make sure that you're willing to talk to people, meet them on their own turf, literally go to their homes, go to their schools, and make sure that you organize with respect and with love, frankly. You can change these things.
Thank you so much for that. And as we wrap up, can you just talk about how the work that you do at Keystone and how people can get involved with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure that folks know that while we've, over the past year, started focusing in rural counties, not just rural counties, we're doing a lot of work with partners in Indiana County, Indiana, Pennsylvania. We always look for sort of a core, an organizing core around which we can build. And we approach our work by talking to the people that rarely are talked to, hearing what they have to say, what they care about, making sure that we identify and always lift up and support existing leaders who haven't had an opportunity maybe to run for office, or new leaders who find out the power that they can build on their own. This isn't empowerment, it's building power. And always, always, we build the network and build the infrastructure that's needed to carry on the work. And we'll be doing work this we are just finalizing the date, but we're going to have our annual Keystone Progress Summit, Pennsylvania's Progressive Summit, that will be coming up this spring. We're trying to figure out how to do the manage the new wave of Omicron and try to do a hybrid if possible. But we're going to be focused on three overwhelming issues to us: American democracy, global climate, and health. And we're going to have a whole range of speakers around issues that they feel are the most important to organize around. And I want to make sure that everybody knows we'll be announcing that. We'll be working with One Hood very closely and other partners, hopefully partners in this event as well. And we look forward to having everyone participate in that that is interested in supporting the work around those three issues.
Thank you so much, Pat, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, and thanks to One Hood Power and everyone doing the work here.
Thank you, thank you. And so, as our time winds down, we want to just like wrap up with some things that are happening in ways that you can get involved. I hope for the past hour, a little over the past hour, we wanted you to reflect not only on January 6th, but why it's so important for people to vote. What are some of the issues impacting communities that are causing them to mobilize around the vote? And where are some of the access points for you to get involved? And so, again, if you have questions about the election, you have questions about election protection, you have questions about the rules and regulations of your local vote, one of the places you want to look at is your local county elections office, your board of elections. On their website, they sometimes will have information about the deadlines, what is required to run to vote, when are they processing and how they are processing your votes. Your Secretary of State's office will have that information as well. And in addition, here in Pennsylvania, we have votespa.gov. It used to be the Vote Spa, but to get everything together, we've changed. It was changed to a .gov domain, and you can go online there. You can check your voter registration. You can sign up and register to vote, but you can also look at what are the requirements to vote to understand why some people are voting. A lot of misinformation came down because people didn't understand that you could register to vote at when you were 17 and a half years old because you would be 18 by the time the election took place. Some people didn't understand those with criminal records were legally able to register to vote. So as long as they were not serving time for a conviction that went against election or election crimes. That's something that was very unique to Pennsylvania. juxtapose it to some of the other states and commonwealths. So it's very, very important when we're talking about our elections that people understand the rules and regulations and understand the information and places to go for their questions. When we're looking at fighting for democracy, we want to make sure that we are reinforcing the idea that we all have a right to have the seat at the table and we all have a right not to be on the menu, because in this, in this region, this commonwealth, it is one person, one vote. And we all have a right to not only vote, but to talk to our elected officials, to have our issues addressed so that no one should be affronted when one population or one group of people are able to vote or are able to engage or able to organize. So what does all this mean? Well, there's a lot of things that are happening right now when it comes to the right to vote. On the federal level, we have the Freedom to Vote Act, we have the Protecting Our Democracy Act, and we have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that we are asking our federal representatives, particularly those in the Senate to Congress, to pass, that will protect the right to vote, that will ensure that people have voting access points. In the past decade, there have been hundreds of closures of polling places all around this country. And we want to make sure that everyone can vote in their neighborhoods, in their districts, so that they are not forced to travel for miles and miles. This not only impacts Black and Brown communities, but it also impacts those in the rural community as well. In addition, we want you to talk to your family members, your friends about voting. Why is voting important? Why do they feel that voting can or cannot change things? To have those conversations. And then lastly, we want you to get involved, whether it's at One Hood Power or different organizations, volunteering, coming together to get out the vote, to protect the vote. And joining the vote means working and building coalitions. Some people can write letters to the editor. Some people can register folks to vote. Some people can make donations. And some people can even run for office. There's so many things that are out there for you to do to protect and fight for democracy. And so I hope for the past hour and a half, you've been blessed by the presenters, the conversations that we've had. Whether you agreed or disagreed, I hope you've learned about a new organization, a way to get involved. And so, with that, my name is Miracle Jones for One Hood Power. Thank you so much for joining us. You're going to continue the conversation by using hashtag since January 6th, and we will see you in the future. And if you're not familiar with One Hood Power, we are a 501c4 organization. Every Monday, right here on our Facebook and YouTube, we do have conversations for a power hour, and we're actually launching a candidate forum. So if you are a voter in Pennsylvania, please make sure you're subscribing to our YouTube, you're following us on social media, because we have a lot of voter information coming your way, a lot of forums, a lot of education, a lot of issues that we'll be bringing to you directly. So with that, my name is Miracle Jones. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day.